Our next speaker is Mr. Kenneth McGuire, Director of MAC and Management Excellence Action Coalition. Mr. McGuire is the president and founder of this organization, which is an international management education and consulting firm for manufacturing companies. Mr. McGuire is recognized for expertise on global competitiveness issues, particularly lean manufacturing, total quality management, and Six Sigma production systems. He has also initiated an educational awareness program called MeetChinaBiz New England to assist small and medium-sized enterprises to help each other as well as help themselves to address the China challenge those companies that are navigating and facing. He is also a member of the board of the Associated Industries of Massachusetts International Business Council that supports the international expansion of Massachusetts trade and business. Today, Mr. McGuire is going to discuss the top 5 mistakes that companies tend to make when they do business in China. So let's find out these mistakes, and hopefully some of you may have answers in the afternoon to address these mistakes.
Thank you very much. As Amy said, Jack Healy, who is one of my bosses, was here first thing this morning introducing some of the background on the Massachusetts economy. And Kristen, who is the AIM person, is also kind of a boss of sorts. As she also eloquently said, I am an organization that helps small and medium-sized enterprises or mid-market manufacturing companies try to cope with this challenge that they're faced with. After what Chris said this morning, I came away wowed again with what it is that is changing and how big it's getting. And then with Zelina coming in and exploring what it is that Massachusetts is doing, again, I was just astounded at some of the new numbers that are coming out. But because I work with mid-market organizations, I think my job here is to bring it back down to street level, if I can. And that's where I work. That's where I have some experience. That's where I can perhaps give you some insights as well. 2 takeaways so far, though, today is number 1, there is huge opportunity in China, and Massachusetts is not realizing but 2/3 of what the opportunity is. The numbers that Chris presented showed that pretty adequately, that there is a huge opportunity still remaining for us to come up to speed with what the rest of even the United States are doing in China. And perhaps part of that reason is that in Massachusetts you can count the number of firms with 500 or more employees on 2 hands. Not that many. But there are 3,000 to 4,000 that are in that other category that are bigger than 20 and less than 500. And that's where the opportunity is, and that's where, unfortunately, so many of our organizations just trying to keep up with what it is they're doing today just don't have the resources or don't believe they have the resources to go further. I'm going to be followed by somebody who I'm certain is going to outline in no uncertain terms the great opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises in China. And it is something that the Chinese government, the Chinese population is seeking because of the expertise. It also creates, by the way, most of the innovation. But I think the other factor that we learned this morning is that there is risk. And the risk is not trivial. It is serious risk that has to be considered when you're going into China. And part of what I'm going to try to tell you is that the way to mitigate risk is better preparation. Nice thing about preparation is the better you prepare, the more you reduce the risk. And then with what we also learned is that there is help available. I can't help but be somewhat posters in the back. When you recognize that's the outcome of undergraduate students, both from here in a project that lasted, as I understand, no more than 7 weeks. And you look at the A3 practice that they put together. A3 is the modern management style everybody is using, and many companies are spending huge amounts of money to learn how to do. And these students not only have done it in spades, they come equipped with that as a way of thinking. Why is it that we're not taking advantage of as much help as we've got available to us? Plus what the Zelina was talking about in terms of the help available from the state. So for me to bring it down to street level, I'm going to try to talk about the mistakes that I see small and mid-market organizations continuing to make and how you can avoid it. First, I want to just echo what everyone else has said. This is not a simple subject in no way. You're talking about 1.3, 1.4 million people. You're talking about 600 different cities. You're talking about 165 cities with a population over 1 million. You're talking about 6 different time zones to cross. You're talking about language barriers with dialect and different ways of communicating. This is a big problem. And the thing about manufacturing in China is that China in the last 20 years has emerged. And they are the disruptive event to be coped with. Manufacturing competition in the same old way we did it in the U.S. is never going to be the same again. As we have seen the economy start to rebound, we have not seen the resurgence in manufacturing in the ways that it used to be in the past, where mass production was the model, cost was just a factor, there were several other things that are going on. We're going to see that manufacturing has changed because China is in the picture. The Chinese growth machine is part of the reason for it, and certainly Chris's numbers give you some evidence as to the size. It's the greatest economic boom ever been witnessed by mankind thus far. It's been doubling doubling every 2 or 3 years in terms of its GDP output, and 7-fold over the last 20, 78% average growth, and 9% last year. The estimates are that among the new and emerging economies, China perhaps will be able to outpace the U.S. in terms of GDP output by the year 2050. So why is China important? It goes without saying. Number one, China is here in manufacturing and is here to stay. There is an infrastructure that's been built and a capability that's been put together and started to be used that nobody can ignore. Second, they are the elephant in the room. No organization is going to be able to not take account of what's going on in China and how to use that as a blended resource with what they're doing. They modernized in all the areas simultaneously. I was, again, Chris's numbers this morning on the number of infrastructure projects like railroads, light rail, heavy rail, intercity rail. I mean, 135 world-class airports are either built or in construction in China for the next 10 years. What do we have in the United States? One, Denver, and that one didn't work too well when it started up. I mean, the infrastructure is in place, and because that infrastructure is in place, it's not all right yet, but it's going to get better. It's not going to get worse with time. The other thing, though, is that global opportunity really is a two-way street. Not only is that an opportunity for our companies to grow, it's an opportunity for their companies to prosper. And I think that people that have recognized that the China price in the last years have, at least since 2009, 2008, has started to double again. And that's in the coastal cities where the costs are going up. So that the cost factors are changing, and they're changing every day. Still in the inner areas, there's still lots of opportunity for very low cost, but then the cost of infrastructure build has to go along with that as well. There are new rules of the road, and that's what we have to do. So when I ask small and medium-sized company, how you doing, and how do I know you're telling me the truth, the first thing you ask them is, what about the China factor on your business? In most cases, the pricing has been influenced by the Chinese manufacturing emergence. And certainly the cost structures on our companies has got to adjust in order to cope with that. And that isn't doing the same thing, same old way. For manufacturing companies to compete against this new emerging enterprise model that we're seeing come out of China, we're going to have to learn how to lead successfully, how to develop successfully, and how to do differently. The real question is whether or not many of our companies who are hanging on to the good old days and hope that it'll all come back, whether they'll survive through that. And when we take a look at these students and the projects coming out, we see the opportunity for the best and brightest to get in there and have a major influence early on from the get-go. And I don't know that we're taking as good advantage of it as we should. When most small and medium-sized organizations think about China, they just look at that as such a daunting challenge. They have no idea where to start. And again, saying that you need to prepare well is obviously a cliche that would be repeated. But where do you start and what do you do? This afternoon we're going to hear three companies that have in fact done some pretty remarkable things inside China in just the last couple of years. And they're not huge honeymoon name companies like the GEs with $5 billion or the Procter & Gamble's with 12 point something. Yesterday, P&G, what did they go through yesterday when they went down in value? Lost a lot of work. But, you know, those companies, they have the resources with which to do it. It's the companies that we're looking at in the small and mid-marketplace where the opportunity still arises. So what we need to help those companies with is oversimplification. China is, in fact, a place they need to go visit to see that it's not bicycles in the streets, it's modern infrastructure. It's not handwork, it's modern machine tools. Some of the best in the world are there and not being utilized effectively, but they're there. Everything there is changing very, very fast. And I couldn't help but, from Chris's remarks, see the tremendous changes that take place just in the last few years. You're seeing industrialization in every one of the cities. You're seeing huge infrastructure build. You're seeing the construction boom. And while there's some speculation that that bubble could burst, and likely it could, because a lot of problems still exist with all that construction, and construction is certainly an engine for fast kick-start growth, not necessarily sustainable growth. If you don't fill up those apartment buildings, if you don't fill up those office buildings, you don't fill up those industrial parks, all the infrastructure build can possibly turn bad on you. But the other thing we have to look at is that the old factors of competition no longer play. New, good, fast, and cheap. When I grew up in manufacturing, that's all you had to do. Get something new, something good, something fast, and something cheap. China's changed that. Anything we do new, they will replicate with a fax and start producing it tomorrow. And new is not new very long anymore. We look at, I still have lights blinking on most of the electronic devices in my house, and yet now everything is now going to computer controls. And you know, when you all of a sudden see the technology changes, 18 months, 19 months is the life of a product, so new is not very much of a safe haven anymore. And cheap, it won't work either. We're up against a cost structure that is probably 20 to 1 against us in China. They have the lowest resource cost for material and labor in the world. And by the way, they also don't have something we got a lot of: lawyers and accountants. We seem to need every single one of them, and they don't have very many and don't seem to be bothered by it. So when you start talking about the overhead costs, they're starting up without it, and perhaps learning to do without it. And we still have to worry about some of the things we're doing. Now, certainly that in regulations and other areas, that has got a downside as well. But at the same time, it's the new reality we have to figure out. What we need is innovation. And that's an easy thing to say and a hard thing to materialize and point to. The 7 posters on the back, that's innovation. That's taking 7 weeks to solve a complex problem or a problem that somebody didn't know how to solve. And do it with 2 languages, 2 sets of students, and real outcomes. That's innovation. Innovation is not the R&D. Innovation, for all intents and purposes, is learning how to do it better, do it faster, and do it, perhaps, with less resource consumption. Not cost, resource consumption. Because resource costs are going to go up, but the consumption, if it can come down, can give you a level playing field. The top 5 mistakes, therefore, that I see with small and mid-market companies going to Japan. Number 1, underestimating how big a deal this is. As Joe Biden might say, this is no small thing. This is a big, big deal. You need your A team. You can't afford to do this with folks that haven't got anything else to do anyway. You need to pull the players out of the forefront and put them in charge. They have got to be taken out of the line and given the opportunity to do what it is. It's not a project, it's got to be a full-time effort. And so many organizations simply say, well, no. We'll give it to engineering. They can update the drawings, no problem. That's not true. If they could have updated the drawings, they'd already be updated. The chances that the existing structure is going to be able to help you get into China by doing it as a part-time project just won't work. It just isn't going to be there. Second, we've heard before and we'll hear again and we'll hear all the time. And I expect this afternoon we'll hear some great examples of misunderstanding. Just misunderstanding the relationship. How do things really work? How do things work there? How do they work here? Lots of examples of the one I will think of, and certainly Peter Johnson will remember very, very carefully, very closely, was just about this time of year when we went to a 5-star hotel on a day up in the very northern part of the Heilongjiang province. And it was up there in the north, and it was a very, very warm day. And we went into this 5-star hotel, and everybody got to their room, and they said the rooms are terrible. They're all hot. The heat seems to be on. And it took us 2 hours to find out that the heat stays on officially until May 30th. And that you can't turn the heat off because the air conditioning is not allowed to go on until the end of the month. So that, again, in a 5-star hotel, you had the hardware all in place and the software didn't seem to work all that well. There are knowledge and cultural gaps where this hardware that is in place and looks like a Western-style hardware simply doesn't work, again, the right way. There are lots of things that just don't seem to keep pace. In another instance, I would cite that was kind of comical. Went into a place where all the escalators only went up because it was the beginning of the day and everybody's coming in and going to the second floor. Nobody's going back. So there was no way to get back down after you got up because the escalators were all programmed to go up. Again, the hardware of having this first-class building, first-class way of getting around, and nobody being able to reverse the escalator. The hardware was in place, the software just wasn't there yet. And place after place, time after time, you'll find the same kinds of things in products. You'll find products where the material you receive just is not standard material that you would even consider using yet. You've got an entire order full of things using material that shouldn't have been used in the first place. Again, that's what's happening. The other thing that people forget about and make mistakes on is people. People are people are people are people, here and there. Taking something that doesn't work and moving it 8,000 miles away really doesn't make it work. And And you've got people issues in all places. You have to really develop people, not just hire people. Developing people is an important process that we have got to take on, whether we do it here or whether we do it there. The time it takes to develop people is it's grudgingly slow, but it has to be done. If you don't do it, we look at things like Toyota. They grew a little too fast and didn't bring their people with them, didn't bring the training system, and didn't bring the disciplines along, and all of a sudden we see them with a big problem on their hands. And then there are the execution flybys. We make assumptions based on what we know, based on our experience, and our experience is not a Chinese experience. The Chinese make the same kinds of assumptions about us based on their experience, and their experience is not our experience. We just have all kinds of problems. Recognizing that you need to learn a lot, not just about the business you're in, but the culture that you're taking it to, and respect that culture, and respect some of the origins of some of the practices that you find in place, is an important thing that many companies miss, and they miss it by a lot. Those are the 5 mistakes. But what are the criteria for being successful? I would say that there are 3. There's an organizational readiness. If your organization isn't ready, and if you don't have a very compelling reason shared throughout the organization for why you want to go to China, you risk having a missed flyby. Second, operationally. Do you have the strength in your organization? Do you in fact have the managerial capability to do without some of your first string for periods of time that are long and replace them with second, third tier organizational people and still get by? If the people that you need to go to a foreign place are very good, the chances are you're going to miss them where you are. So if you don't have the depth of the bench, you're going to have some problems. And third, the financial staying power. I didn't hear it, but I know Deloitte has been quoted on a number of times to say anything is possible, but everything is difficult. And these days, it also costs a lot more than you thought. That you can do anything you want in China, but the risk of the amount of time it's going to take and the cost it's going to incur is something that's very real. And you better have the financial staying power to be able to put money into something for a long period of time without getting much out. 2 years is about the average that the American Chamber in Shanghai has been quoted as saying it takes to get to a break-even point in China. Some organizations that make a few mistakes, takes them an extra year or more. But nobody gets, from the get-go, profitable and cash flow positive immediately. It's just too much of an expense. So in organizational readiness, do you really have the right reasons for going to China? It's very important to self-examine the organization and find out why you're going. You just heard about it? Somebody on the board told your president? Somebody here wants to do it. What are the real reasons you're going to China? What exactly is your concern? Why is it that China is such an important thing? Because free trade isn't working for you these days? Because you're having continuing decline in your manufacturing, you figure you can get it all back by getting the cost down real low. Your industry is at distress, and it seems to be growing in China. The reasons SMEs need to, small and medium-sized enterprises, is that in almost all cases, for the small and mid-market organization, it's tougher and tougher to raise revenues. And by the way, they're raising revenues in this domestic economy, which, again, Chris's numbers showed pretty definitely, is not growing at all versus 9 to 10% growth in a place that's 4 to 5 times the GDP potential for us. It says maybe exporting is the real opportunity to grow that top line. And what I find in so many small and mid-market companies is that their export department is the fax machine, hoping for something to come in. They don't have an aggressive outward effort. If you don't have an aggressive outward effort, again, in a competitive society, you're going to, in a competitive marketplace, you're going to have some difficulties growing the top line. So you've got to have some actions there. Second, we're finding that with the squeeze on price, that the margins continue to decline. We're not seeing the same old margins, so we can't afford the same old overhead, the same old structure that we used to. Even when we put better processes and better products in place, we can't seem to get that premium that we used to get for being a little early or being a little better or being a little better known. The other thing is cash is in terrible shortage. And the cash shortages that everybody seems to be facing these days with the banking situation as it is, makes us less and less attractive as an acquisition target. Although maybe some of the things I heard Zelina talking about with the efforts that the state is making to attract investors may make some of that a little easier. But for most companies that are doing the same old, cash is a short supply. And the reputations that a lot of our companies have, are not necessarily the winners that are in fact being sought very fast. The other reason it's important for the SME or for the small and mid-market company is that you have to ask when you go in, will this company in fact be around in 5 years if it'll make some changes? I mean, considering where you are right now, are you still going to be around and keep doing business in the same old-fashioned way? Without an access into a global market? What is your chance of being able to grow enough to cover the main overhead? So when you're looking at organizational readiness, you want to take a look at what are your reasons on the left-hand tier, and then where do they stack up? Is it just a good idea somebody had? Or is it something your customer told you you've got to be there? And it wasn't that many years ago that GE brought all of its customers together and said, we're bringing you here to China because we want to show you the China opportunity. And for those of you who don't see it and don't think that it's good, I will promise you that within 5 years, we won't be doing business with you. If you're not here, we won't be doing business with you because this is where the opportunity that we see to grow is, and we want you as a co-located partner. That was a very serious factor in many organizations' decision to move. And that's a good one. If that's the kind of thing you're having, then that's important. So you want to take a look at why is it you're doing this. The second thing is operational capability. Are you really good enough yet? I mean, do you have enough slack? As a lot of companies cut back in this last recent recession, a lot of muscle got cut. A lot of companies don't have enough muscle to make it in an expanded growth situation. So they have to go out and get some new muscle and put it in place. If your bench is not very deep, you could have some trouble making it. And by the way, have you ever transferred this stuff before? Have you ever tried to transfer product? How many people have had a transfer product, experience that wasn't too happy? Things you got to evaluate in this operation is how strong is your brand, how about your technology, how important is it to the core of the business you're in, because you're going to have a lot of leakage in that technology when you take it somewhere else. How much experience does it take to succeed? What is the reputation risk? Like Toyota's reputation risk took a horrible hit over a very, very simple misstep. And how about your customers? Once you go over and start serving your customer over there, if you don't serve them very well, what do you think your customer is going to be able to find in terms of other capability right next door to yours? How deep are your skills? And can you really put a trusting partnership together and an alliance with another company? You ever done that? I mean, so many companies are hiding things from their bank when they're making loans. People are hiding it from the tax collector. I mean, they don't have a trusting nature. There's got to be some trusted nature in some of the things that are being done with partners that are going to be halfway around the world, because they're going to be running your business for you. They're going to be taking your name and putting it out there. And how responsive are you to change? I couldn't help with that change capability that you had. I mean, it was just perfect. The resilience to change in a lot of our companies in this country, unfortunately, is not what it ought to be. And the Chinese nature is to respond to what's going on. And financial staying power is the last piece. Can you withstand all the problems and still survive? Who, in fact, is your sponsor-in-chief? If you're going to spend a lot of money over a couple of years without much return, who is it that's going to stand up for you and say, no, just let them continue. They'll get there. If that isn't somebody pretty senior in the organization, you might be in the risk of not being able to do it. How many years or months can you survive without making a profit? If you don't have that level of experience, can you afford to go out and buy it? They tell me, and I'm not an expert in this, but they tell me that $600,000 to place an expat in China is kind of a low-cost opportunity. That sometimes it'll run as high as $1 million to put somebody over there. And to hire people over there, you may have to hire 2 or 3 in order to maintain and retain the employment that you get over there. What's your track record on complex tasks? Have you done this in any level of complexity before? Have you been successful at it? The home organization, that's one that a lot of people really underestimate. When you start going, the minute you say, I'm moving some things to China, the home organization is just like the amoeba. They start immediately rejecting that as an idea. Because they see that as job loss to their friends, their relatives, I mean, people they've known. They resist that. And they will do everything, whether it's defiance or whether it's passive, to kind of just thwart the effort, because they see that as something, as losing something that they hold dear. So your internal organization will many times be the thwarting mechanism on your outside initiative. The next couple of questions: how much can you afford to go there? A CEO really has to go a couple, 3, 4 times a year in order to really cement a relationship, at least in the first couple, 3 years. If you don't have that level of involvement, or you can't afford that level of involvement, you may not be able to establish the relationship you really want. And the best expression I heard is that the China experience can sometimes be stir-fried, but it can't be microwaved. It takes a year or 2 to build the kind of relationship that has to be there, and the financial relationship that will work. So are you ready? And how would you know for sure? There's a couple of hints there as to what it is you might want to look for first. But I would also say that there are no simple, single answers to how you do this. It is company specific. Each organization has to examine itself, examine its resources, examine the cards it's dealt, examine the product and process, and take a look very carefully before making a move 8,000 miles away. The folks that heard about China being low cost and got a United Airlines ticket went over there and found that low cost on the 9th out of 10 days that they were there. And coincidentally, they found it in the hotel lobby on the day before they were going to leave, talking to somebody who was speaking English and was absolutely influential in their business, in their product, in their market. And then 6 months later, nothing showed up. But the difficulty is it does take a lot of effort to get this done, and better preparation will get you there. If we had simple answers, they'd all be wrong anyway. And the last thing is carefully carve out the value proposition that you're taking and bringing from China. In so many organizations that, again, I've looked at, once you took a look at what was being done internally in the organization itself, you found opportunities to cut the cost dramatically. And you didn't need to run halfway around the world. And if you did run halfway around the world, it was for market expansion, not for a cost problem. I mean, you know, labor these days is the one thing everybody cites. Chinese labor is so inexpensive. Yeah? And labor is what, 8 to 12% of the total cost of product? I mean, what would be the sense of chasing around the world to get 4 cents off the dollar? That just doesn't make good sense. You really want to take a look at the opportunity to do it without any overhead, the opportunity to do it in a growing market, the opportunity to do it and hone your skills with product that is different from the product you're currently running. That's where you want to go. So, the China challenge is number one. Success is very much within your reach, no question about it. Any small and mid-sized company, as you'll hear this afternoon, can do it pretty successfully. You got to decide to act, and when you decide to act, you got to put some money down in the bed. And then you got to gain knowledge, not only about your internal business, but the business that you might be able to bring to another marketplace. And then you want to get some help. And I cite Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, Tiger Woods, Kurt Brady, Tom Brady, and Kurt Schilling. What's the one thing those tremendous athletes have in common? Extraordinary talent, no question about it. Each one of them got extraordinary talent. But every single one of them also respects the value of good coaching. They don't try to go it alone. When they're having trouble, they ask. And they ask people like Zelina, they ask outsiders, they bring in Deloitte, they bring in people like us, and we help them try to get through this problem and come up with a solution that fits their needs. And then the last thing is get started and act fast. Thank you very much. I think I exceeded my 15 minutes, but